Welcome to another episode of Artist Spotlight, the podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Mitch Stringer. This episode brought to you by our friends at Moab. Founded in Moab and inspired by the evolving red rock landscapes of Utah, Moab is built on a simple mission to create the finest, most innovative papers artists and photographers can rely on. As part of the Legion family of fine art papers, Moab sits alongside trusted classics like Rising Museum Board, used by leading framers, museums, and galleries around the world to protect and preserve artwork for generations. When your work deserves the very best, choose Moab and Rising. Well, this episode is one that I've really been looking forward to. I did not know our guest before I was introduced by a mutual friend, the lovely and talented Paris Chong. And the gentleman she introduced me to is none other than LA-based photographer Stefan Vanasco. Stefan, welcome to the show.
What up, Mitch? Thanks for having me.
You know, one of the things that I really, really appreciate about your work and when I've heard you speak on different outlets is you are to me a photographer's photographer. And but what I mean is a lot of times you talk to someone and yes, they have cameras and they're capable of making a competent to good picture, but they're really a portrait photographer, sports photographer, street photographer. And you are a photographer, period. You've done a lot, you've seen a lot. But I'm going to ask you, what kind of photographer are you? Because that's just my perspective, that you are a photographer up for whatever is in front of you.
I think you really hit the nail on the head with that interpretation, and it makes me happy to see the work recognized in such a way. I mean, that's kind of it. Someone says, "What kind of photographer are you? What kind of photography do you do?" And I'm like, "I'm just a photographer. I make photos of anything that is intriguing, inspiring. Maybe I'm trying to learn a new technique. Maybe it's a different subject matter. Like it's all fun. That's the beauty to me with photography, that it's never ending to a degree where you could learn to shoot something new, shoot with different focal lengths, different processes, techniques, mediums, and it's a great way to keep yourself really inspired by the medium.
You know, as I've been open to shooting lots of things over a long period of time, I will admit that I have shot some things that I prefer not to shoot again. And it's not at all to denigrate the specialty whatsoever, but I do not prefer to shoot weddings, of which I've shot two as favors. Didn't go
Mhm.
out looking for it, literally just about fell on my lap, but been there, done that. Prefer prefer not to do that. Are there genres or things that you can shoot, but you're kind of like, that would be the least favorite thing that I would want to shoot on a given day.
I think it depends on the situation. So, like, if it's a wedding photographer per se, and you're kind of hired, you're a hired help to capture this day for these people, right? Where we want this and we want that. That doesn't sound too appealing. Versus if someone says, "Hey, I really love the way you photograph this. Come to our wedding and do whatever you want to do." That's a whole different, now I'm excited to shoot a wedding in that way. So I think it really just depends on if it's an assignment versus personal work. Because I mean, I could be in a most mundane place, but if I have this personal freedom to interpret it and make photos the way I want, then that's great. But if someone's giving me a shot list, and kind of takes the joy out of it. So
I
there's
kind of
nothing off the top of my. Sorry about that. I was just gonna say, to end that question, there's nothing off the top of my head that I wouldn't. Like last year, I did my first engagement portrait shoot, but it was with a model who I had photographed before, and she was like, "Hey, like I just love your photography. Come shoot our thing." She didn't have like shoot it this way. She's like, "We have our outfits, we have our location, and just do your thing." So that was like a really fun experience for me. But yeah, off the top of my head, there's nothing off that I'm like, "Oh, I would never want to do that."
I feel like, as it kind of relates to that, but even broader, there are certain types of photography I think that lend themselves to us trying to find moments within a bigger environment. Then there are situations in photography where the subject is pretty obvious. if I'm in Africa and I see a lion and it's about to, take down a zebra, pretty clearly that's the subject. But if I'm on the streets of New York and I find a part of the city where the light is hitting in just kind of a great way, and there's a bunch of people, 20 people coming up to a red light, that's 20 people. It's a lot of people, but
Mhm.
I'm looking within those 20 people for the little kid with the, it sounds like a cliche, but just to make the example, with like the oversized lollipop who's putting it in his mom's purse, and like that's the picture amongst this 20 people grouping. And I feel like with the wedding scenario we just talked about, if somebody else was getting those requested shots, but somebody said, Stefan, I want you to find those moments within this wedding that aren't
Mhm.
on any shot list that we're going to look back at and probably enjoy way more than the neatly organized pictures of everybody at each table, because that's
Mhm.
exciting at that point.
Yeah, I mean, that point, you're interpreting moments, you're interpreting framing in front of you. It's spontaneous, it's like, you're not directing people, hey, put that piece of cake in her mouth again. Like, you're trying to like approach it almost like street photography in a sense, but at a wedding. Like, you're kind of like, building off of that.
So when I was kind of doing some of the research and listening and looking back on kind of your history photographically and as a young guy as a skateboarder, I connected to it because when I was growing up, I played baseball. And in
Hmm.
my case, I played college baseball and just, but frankly, wasn't good enough to become a
Hmm.
professional baseball player. And so part of what I wanted to do as it would later evolve is to photograph Major League Baseball,
Hmm.
which, in a way, kind of accomplished a version of what I wanted to. In yours with skateboarding, as I've heard you say, you reached a point when you were skateboarding, but you sort of started to add photography into the mix with when you were out skateboarding, looking, shooting piers, etc. And then that evolved more into you not as much skating as photographing skaters. What was that? Do I have that sort of characterized accurately? And then how did you kind of transition from being a participant, with your board to very involved, but with your camera?
Oh, so yeah, I would say that that's about 70% there. So for me, well, I mean, yeah, because it depends on which interview I guess you heard.
Sure.
I Yeah, so grew up skateboarding. It was like everything to me, totally consumed my life from like 12 to about like 21-ish, 22. Like, as far as like having a board, going out every day and trying to skate, try to pursue the dream of being a sponsored skateboarder. And then probably about like 19, 20-ish, there was a very talented group of younger skaters with us. Um, namely one of them was Paul Rodriguez, who is,
Yeah.
Nike's like premier skateboarding athlete. Like, he was like the little guy in our group, and you see what they were doing, and they bypassed us by like light years, like, of their abilities, and we're like, geez. So I think that reality is, even though I made it as a sponsored amateur skateboarder, like, the idea of being pro in this whole career thing was like, okay, I don't think this is gonna work. Like, what do I want to try to do? I've always been a fan through the years with friends, like making skateboard videos and doing that. So I didn't get involved into shooting skateboarding like as a transitional point. What had happened was I was running a skate camp for kids in Northridge. This is a total different way of some people find photography. I was running a skateboard camp for kids. I had three brothers in my camp. They were 8, 11, and 12. Their father, Christian man, who would later become like a very important figure in my life and a mentor. So I became friends with him, seeing him come and drop his kids off, pick him up. And then one day the kids like tell me, yeah, our dad owns this adult video production company. And I was like, okay, he doesn't strike me as the guy, he would go play tennis and he was very affluent and like just spoke well. Like, just at that time, this is like 2000-ish, 2001. And like, I was just all like, this doesn't strike me as a guy who owns that kind of industry or company. So anyway, I told him, he's like, yeah, that's what I do. And just became better friends with him. I would take his kids skating, almost like babysitting. And then it turned out one day he's like, "Hey, I want to make a skateboarding adult production. Will you produce it for me?" And I'm 21. I'm like, what do I have to do? He's like, just get skaters involved, make it cool. He's like, I respect this culture so much that if I do this, I kind of want it to like at least be as good as we can make it be. So I worked with a young director on that shoot. It did well for him, for the owner, Christian. So he's like, come work for me. You're going to be my personal assistant half the day, and the other half the day, you're going to scan negatives for our website. So I was like, all right, because at that turning point, I'm like, well, what do I want to do in my life? I kind of grew up in this like punk rock, anti-culture of skateboarding through the 90s. So I was like, well, at least this is legal and, it's a legit company. I was like, I'll just do this. It's kind of like a placeholder is what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And then he was like, hey, you used to make skate videos. This may be a year or so later because you want to direct. And I'm just like, well, I know there's more money if I do that than sitting in the office scanning negatives. So I was like, sure. So that led to directing. Directing led to me hiring a photographer, makeup artist, production assistant, like, the whole scheduling when you want to do these shoots. And if the photographer was booked that I wanted to use was booked or wasn't available, then I would have to reschedule everything. And so the tie with skateboarding was like skateboarding magazines through the 90s showed me this world of photography that it was very loose, it was very energetic, like using fisheyes and dragging the shutter, and it was
Mhm.
almost experimental that you're seeing in the magazine, but it captured something that I loved in a way that captivated me. So my walls, like, that was my first exposure to photography, so I always had an interest in it. So at this point, I was like, well, I have money saved. Can I just buy a camera and I'll teach myself photography and I'll be the photographer on these shoots too? And again, Christian Mann was just like, sure, go ahead, which is kind of crazy that, these are like $20,000, $25,000 budgets, and you're trusting a 21-year-old who has no photography experience to like learn as he goes, which is kind of crazy. So this was still, film was the primary thing. Digital was just emerging. So like the Canon 10D had just come out. So I had my Canon, like, Pro SLR at a 10D. The 10D was kind of like a Polaroid in a sense where I could like get the
Mhm.
settings, see how it looked, and then shoot the film. So anyway, that's how I started with photography. I worked in that industry for, about 10 years and reached a point where I was like, oh, I don't want to be 50 or 60 doing this. I really love photography. I feel like this is a time if I want to pursue this and see where it takes me, this is it. Like I have to do that. So, but in that meantime, again, like, so when I started working and doing that photography for that line of work, it did begin into like, oh, I'm taking my camera with me when I go skate with friends. I'm taking my camera with me when I do travel. I started making more photos outside of that realm and learning and understanding more and more photography stuff. Yeah, so I just reached a turning point where I was like ready to like see where photography would take me, and yeah, just been pretty fortunate through early opportunities through skateboard companies and streetwear companies to do photography, incorporate my pictures, and that kind of catapulted me with the ability to like really keep going with photography and pursue it more and more. So sorry if that's like a long winded
No, no,
thing, but
no.
that's like, yeah.
That's great. And one of the things that I feel is that I shoot professional sports. That's what I shoot. So whether it's baseball or football or
Hmm.
racing, whatever it is. But when I shoot literally everything else, I feel like shooting portraits, shooting street, shooting wildlife, and wherever I am, it still informs my eye and my
Hmm.
photography. And I take little bits of that with me into what I, as the saying goes, get paid to do, which would be shooting sports. So within the context of your career, you've skated, so you understand the movement of the body in a sporting situation. You know the sport, so you know what to anticipate, so you can be ready before that thing happens, so you can capture it. You've shot, high shutter speeds, etc. You've been involved in the adult industry, so understanding whether it's lighting or the form and shape of people. And so then throughout that continuum, at one point, you create your own clothing brand. So,
Yeah,
so, so
so mhm.
where
Go
does
on.
where does that plot, so to speak, along this timeline of the career?
The clothing company.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I'll say this too. Another fortunate part of working in the adult industry was understanding. legal things, so like model releases, proper
Mhm.
IDs of people. So that was like a big thing to understand. And second, looking back was also great because, early on when people were making photographs, usually you're kind of making it for yourself unless you maybe worked for like a publication of some sort. So these companies were making, using photographs for advertisements in magazines. They were using them for DVD, VHS covers. There was multiple outlets. So like I would sit with the art directors or the designers and like understand like, oh, like, see, this is why this picture works better, the lighting here. So that opened me up. So the transition from doing photography to getting into a clothing brand began where, so when I was departing from the adult industry, some of the women who worked in there, like they're just cool people. And so my whole thing was like, well, let's go make photos on our own that we want to make that, everyone's already seen everything from you this way. Like, let's make them like fun, stylish, like wear streetwear clothing, wear hats, and we
Yeah.
could just shoot about whatever we shoot. And so we did that. And then that kind of turned into like, at the time, skateboard companies wanted to feature some of these models, these women on skateboards. So it first started out with like, hey, we're going to do a project with you. We're going to put your photo of so and so on the board. That led to some of the streetwear companies saying, okay, the photo t-shirts were a really big thing at the time. So they were like, oh, like let's do a collaboration. We're gonna put your photographs of so and so on a t-shirt and a hoodie and this and that. So that was kind of cool. And then that led to doing enough for these companies where it was kind of like, why don't you just do it on your own? So I just took that was another gamble. So that's the interesting thing is everyone's like, oh, like, do you do commercial work? And it's like, I do and have done commercial projects throughout the years, but it's not every month I'm doing it because the clothing brand for a long time enabled me to like kind of really go shoot what I want to shoot, make a collection out of it, whether it's like aerial photographs, landscapes, model work, etc., and just make these little clothing collections and sell them. And that, again, allowed me to like pursue photography my own way. So that was like
You know,
around
you,
like 2013 that the clothing company like started.
okay. Just hearing everything that you've shared and having researched your career as well, one word kind of jumps out at me, and that is tenacity. It seems like being tenacious and hardworking, and this word I mean in the positive sense, opportunistic, where there's an opportunity, not only identifying the opportunity, having the curiosity, and then having the work ethic to pursue it. Where do you think that comes from within you?
I mean, I would probably say a lot of that what you just described instilled by my father. He ran his own business. He grinded, hustled in the good way. So I mean, I just saw that and saw that motivation, and I think at that time too, when I was transitioning from the adult to this, like, I was just kind of like I was in a bad financial space. So it was just kind of like when you have an opportunity to follow something you love, which is really important, I think you have to do that. And that was my whole thing was like, and still to this day, photography is like a meditative outlet for me where it's like, no matter what's going on in my life or in the world, like I go do photos, I feel 1,000% better, even if I don't make a great picture. Like just the act of walking around somewhere, just using my camera makes me thrilled. So I think photography played a heavy role during that time to put me in a more optimistic, positive mindset. Yeah. So then like when opportunities are coming and you're kind of coming from a hard place and these things are popping up, like opportunistic, it's like, yeah, like you have to make the most of that time and what's going on and do what you can with it. And I think it's a good thing. I think, especially it's a tricky thing with art and commerce and like you're dealing with money, you're dealing with this. But I think as long as it's in line with what feels right to you, right? Because there's sometimes, and I've been a part of business deals or, projects where, oh, we want to do this. And it initially doesn't feel right, but you kind of like go along with it. And then like when it's done, you're like, oh man, like that wasn't that wasn't the move. Like I shouldn't have done that. So I do believe truly in like following your gut instinct and recognizing like, oh, this feels good. Like I should do this. So that was another key factor of like trying to make the most of what's in front of me at that time because, especially, in life, the more we live life, we see like things are waves and like strike now because if you don't, you won't have that same opportunity per se, years later. It's being attentive to stuff like that.
sometimes those sayings, it's like, some sayings are, you kind of roll your eyes at, but sometimes sayings are sayings for a reason, like the expression timing is everything. And it really is. It's just situational things happen. And sometimes they happen because you put yourself in the right place to increase the likelihood of things happening. But sometimes just things happen, and first you have to see the opportunity, then you have to be able to pursue the opportunity, and then ultimately you have to deliver the goods if the door is open to that opportunity.
Mhm.
So as a photographer, are you a guy who, when you're not out shooting on a project, you're still going to have the camera with you, it's going to be around your neck just in case? Or do you sometimes have times, or is your norm like, look, I've been working, I just came off of like a 10-day project, I'm fried, I just don't need to have the camera around my neck? Where do you fall in that sort of continuum of 24/7 camera guy, or I need to put it down for a little bit?
I would say 24/7 camera guy, because my projects are all personal work per se. And we've all had that moment or time when we leave to go even just to the grocery store. I'll leave my camera at home and you see something, you're like, oh, yeah, of course, like the one day I don't have my camera.
Yep.
I've had friends who work for, various forms. Like one does skateboard photography for Adidas. Another one does, portraiture headshots for a lot of like corporate companies and editorial work. And I'll go out with them and like they're not as active. And like I keep the camera out and it's just again, if it slightly intrigues me, like whatever it may be, I'll make a photo of it just for the sake of seeing how it translates onto a frame. Yeah, and so for my work, the way I kind of do things is building a body of work. I have like micro projects that I do that like, oh, this is gonna go to that, that can go to this. This photograph may be, I don't know what I'm doing with it yet, but I'm gonna hold on to it and just kind of keep doing like that. And so my I guess livelihood and my work really is dependent on me always being observant and always making pictures, even not just for myself, but like, oh, this is gonna go for that. So yeah, 24/7 camera guy for sure. Whether it's my Leica, whether it's a point and shoot film camera, whether it's my iPhone, any type of device really.
And to that point, as a photographer, as a creative person, there's, I'll call it a stereotype, where you have folks who are incredibly talented artistically but maybe struggle on the business side. Then you have people who are very business oriented, everything
Hmm.
has to be within the box, and they can't kind of relax and just be creative. Um, so my question for you is, as a working photographer, this is your career, this is what you do, how do you organize that career? How do you organize that career slash life, to stay on track? Well, first of all, to create a track and then stay on that track. And certainly if a client hires you for a commercial project, that's more clear, there's specific dates, there's a shoot there, etc.
Hmm.
But there's many times absent that, where you're the one creating your project, with a hope of some sort of benefit down the line. How do you kind of manage that within yourself?
I think it's the movement of the movement of the act of making photographs, like just things in motion stay in motion. So I think
Mm-hmm.
like that's a big thing. Looking at your work is very important. So spending time to look at it and making prints like keeps all of these are essential elements that keep the momentum going. And then sometimes it's recognizable. Like I think there was a year or so ago, shortly after those towers in Los Angeles got graffitied up, and it was like this astonishing kind of thing that happened. I remember the mayor was like, everyone took their drones up, and I was like, okay, well, let me just wait till it dies down a bit. The mayor of LA at the time was like, okay, we're going to allocate, money to try to help clean this up. So I was like, okay, now I want to get this. Took a helicopter up. I was like, I got to shoot this before, if they are going to clean it before it's gone. Like I just have to do that. So I went up and made some photographs, and it's like it's just there's cultural instances or moments that I know if okay, if I make this photograph, okay, these are going to be prints. This is going to work. And like sure enough, with that photos of those towers, like did really well making prints myself and selling them. Made some skateboards of them. So I recognize these instances, whether it's like the Dodgers, in LA are just such like a city favorite, so photographs of Dodger game going on at night, or photographs of the Dodger parade, or all these things like those. Okay, I know these things will work not only as a body of work, but also as an isolated moment of like, oh, I have prints of these available and people will buy them. And, then also too, I think the fun fact of like just making prints and sharing that process through social media platforms reminds people that the photographs we make can be printed, they can be hung in a home, they can be purchased. So that
Yeah.
stirs up like a whole other conversation when people see the print coming out or see, me framing something for someone who ordered a print or a client.
As a photographer early on, most people tend to look left to right and see what's around, and then they pick out a subject and they make a picture. As time goes on, you realize that aside from in front of you and left and right, you can look down, you can look up, you can do macro photography. You've taken it to a whole other level, literally, or I should say altitude, with your aerial photography. How did that kernel of thought come to mind to get up in a helicopter to make pictures that are 1,000 or more feet up? When Because that's very different than what you had done earlier in your career.
A buddy of mine in New York had done a couple flights, and I was like, "Oh, that's a very good idea." So I just found a pilot in LA at the time who was flying out of the Van Nuys airport, which was close to me, and just went up. And the first time I went up was like hooked. Like you grow up or you like live in a place long enough, when you get to see it from above, you're like, wow, like this is totally different,
Mm.
So went up, just kind of like first flight was hitting the basic landmarks like downtown LA, the LA River, Hollywood sign, Dodger Stadium. And so I was like, oh, it's kind of intriguing. So then we do a couple more flights and just got hooked. It was just like such a fun thing, especially because the pilot flew out of airports near where I was living. And are you free to fly today? Okay, yeah, I'll meet you in an hour. Like it was very accessible to like go up and do these flights. So weather's looking interesting. Like let's go up this day, or like let's try to shoot this at night. So some of that was trial and error, and some of that was just like there's something going on. Like let's go try to see and we can make a photo of it. So yeah, it just got addictive. So and right now I'm currently revisiting all that stuff to re-archive from starting 2014 up until 2025, and it's pretty interesting because I'm like rediscovering photographs that I might have dismissed at that time for whatever reason. But yeah, that was the thing too. So it's like I was doing a ton of model work, but in between the model work, I was also like a camera with me all the time, like street stuff, whatever interested me. So I never let like the box of like, well, you're known for this, because that was like the big push too. Was like doing that kind of work led to when people would describe me or discuss me, like, oh, he's the guy who shoots models. Like, okay, like, no, I'm a bit more than that, So it's kind of like a personal challenge. Like, oh, well, let me just show people that like I can shoot whatever I want to shoot, and aerial was just another part of that.
I will say that it is very cool that you had a nickname, Van Styles. That's pretty cool at one point along the way.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was again going back to that adult world. The owner was like, "You need to figure out a name, like to do this." I was like, "Okay," and everyone just thought like it was cool. It didn't really strike like a relation to that world, and so when I just kept doing photography and I left that world, I just went under that name. But then you see, yeah, at some point, it's like for example, I remember it was 2016. Um, the woman who was VP of marketing with like Kiran Karnani. I don't know if you, yeah. So she was like, "Oh, we want to use one of your photographs for like some marketing thing." And she said, "What do you want to be credited as?" And at the time, I was already playing with this idea of like, "Oh, like should I drop this name?" And I asked her about, "Well, you work in marketing, like give me your thoughts." And she shared a lot of great insight as well into that. She's like, "Look, like." You as a photographer are evolving. There will be more strength going by just your real name versus like the alias thing. And she's like, I think you should do that. So she was a big component in me feeling confident enough to like, because in this world of fast-paced social media marketing and quote unquote branding, so I think so many photographers or people have to brand themselves.
Mhm.
That brand of a name had something going for it, I guess. But if it that like what's going for it is putting me in a box, and it's like it's not really helping me. then also too, again, like, you invest yourself into an art form or a craft like photography. I think at some point, I don't know, like to be 60 and calling me Van Styles would be a little funny versus like my real name. So yeah, it was just kind of like cool. Then it was just like, yeah, like I'm just gonna shed that, go by my real name, and just keep this pursuit of, what is photography to me.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. What's initially cool and all that and catchy, at some point it becomes a limiting factor. So no,
Hmm.
that makes sense. Just going back to the aerial photography, my thought, not having done that ever before, but having seen your work, as you said, you start photographing landmarks and things that are sort of fairly, I'll call it obvious subjects when you're photographing that area because people understand it, but you're giving them a vantage point from a different perspective that people don't typically have. I would think the more that you shoot that and you're shooting landmarks, that even evolves further to where you start recognizing patterns, street patterns. You start recognizing patterns in housing developments that were built, in the 50s and 60s. And so now it's not just iconic landmark photography from a different perspective. Now it's taking almost like a different, or could take an almost different artistic perspective, like I said, with the patterns, whether it's palm trees lining a street or it's. So my question, I guess, is you went up to photograph with kind of initial thought of this would be cool, totally different perspective, let's see what I can see. Now that you've been doing this for some time now, what, I guess, did you learn along the way that you didn't think initially you'd find when you got up in the air?
Um, yeah, that's a great point. So like when like I said, I'm revisiting this work, and it's like interesting because like the first, year or so shooting, wider, like 28, 24 millimeter wide. And then like as time goes on, like I'm getting more compressed. So the focal
Mm-hmm.
length went more to 50. It's going to like 90, like a lot of 135. So I started getting more intrigued because like after you shoot everything's so wide, at some point it's like, okay, it's just everything's just wide. You see everything, right? But working with tighter focal lengths allow you to really let the viewer zero in on what exactly you're seeing. So it's really fun to like compress things in the distance with what's in the foreground. So that happened, and yeah, you're 1,000% right, because even like a great city like Los Angeles, um, you can exhaust yourself if you're just like, oh, big wide grand shot, big wide grand shot, when there is a lot of like minute details below, which is what I'm looking for. And I'm glad I shot a lot of it over the years, because again, like I would shoot it and be like, okay, that's just cool. I don't know what I'm gonna use it for, but like, you know, um, that point of it. Then also too, I think the other thing that I learned is how you photograph Los Angeles is not necessarily the same way you would want to photograph like different cities, because I've been able to do this in different places. So like, going to Boston and flying in Boston, you realize like, okay, it's a smaller, denser city. There's an airport right across the water. So your restrictions on height, you're restricted on height and how far you can go. So you
Right.
almost have to like work a little bit wider to really shoot that city, right? And then, I've gone to like Miami, which, has the skyline, but it's not as bustling as like New York, so you're dealing with like different color palettes and like, well, like what's intriguing here. So each city, you have to approach it differently. It's not like one formula that works across all cities per se. So that's also been like a learning curve of like understanding like how to do aerial work.
It's like we mentioned wedding photography early on. As a competent photographer, we can make a picture that's properly exposed, etc. But as someone who specializes in any given form of photography, it's that detail. It's what you're talking about. If I went up in a helicopter, I'd probably shoot wide, and I'd think, oh, well, next time I'll do this. Or a wedding, people would be thinking about other technical things that just someone doing it for the first time wouldn't think about. So it's interesting how you kind of refine your, not only your eye, but kind of the way your brain is working. So when you're in a helicopter shooting, are you typically having two or three bodies with those two or three different lenses on there, so you can kind of see what's in front of you and pick up the right kit for whatever you're about to shoot? Or are you one who kind of is going to shoot with a given lens and then you're going to just change lenses on that body because now you're going to go for something different?
These days, it's usually just two bodies. I primarily shoot film these days, so like one for black and white, one for color, bring relative
Okay.
focal lengths for both. Um, Usually, if like the only time I experience it, you got to be fast paced. Really fast paced is like when it's just weather. So, like for example, if you're flying an SF and there's like rolling fog, like you kind of have to be a little bit quicker with that. But if I have like a breathing room to kind of like really frame up what I'm kind of seeing, then I'll work with the pilot on that of like, hey, like I'll, frame selector, I can see, okay, the 50 would be better. Let's do another pass, and I'm going to be ready on that pass and then make the photographs. So I think after all the years of kind of like really running a lot of photos from the air, it's more like try to be more, even more precise and selective now on like what I'm shooting and what I'm framing. And then, I think the ability of working with film kind of like still leaves a moment of surprise when I get the negatives back. And it's like, okay, that concept of like framing or whatever I was doing did work out, or but yeah, try to keep it as light and minimal as possible and simple. So
My only experience shooting from the air was in Alaska, and I'm shooting over a dormant, thankfully, volcano, and the pilot is tilting the plane so we can shoot down into the
mm.
volcano. And I just kept thinking, focus, shoot, focus, compose, shoot. And then I thought to myself, holy shit, I hope this is a dormant volcano. So, and this was a little plane. So, you're bouncing all over the place, so I'm curious, and I know people listening are going to wonder, when you're spending time up in this helicopter, what did it take, at least initially, if it took anything, for you to get comfortable with the altitude and just not even give that a thought, and you're just focused on the photography and not, oh, we're hitting, some kind of an updraft or something, and we're really bouncing around here pretty good. Did you ever have to kind of just almost knowingly push that thought out of your head and just get back to photography, or has it just been no big deal the whole way through?
It's been, yeah, it's kind of been like when people ask that, because like I do have a fear of heights. So it is like a thrill to me along with making photos, but the idea of like making pictures knocks all that out, all that fear or worry out of my head. So
Yeah.
I'm making pictures, I'm making pictures. And also too, I think, when I fly, I talk to the pilots, I ask them questions like, like one thing I always tell a pilot, like, don't, if I ask to get a photograph, like, don't feel like you have to make it for me. Like, if you feel like this isn't a good setting, then like, I'm okay with that. And I've done flights where like I've gone to New York and the company I was flying with at the time was like, oh, we're gonna send this new pilot over to like fly you. And I could just tell like he just wasn't confident. So for me, if I feel that insecure about the flight where I can't focus on making pictures, I was like, let's just scratch the flight. Like this isn't worth it to me. Cause like one, and it's a different thing I've learned too. There's pilots who know how to do a tour flight where we're going to take you up and zip you around and show you this. And there's pilots who understand photography and understand like movements within the helicopter and kind of like can understand what you're looking for. So those are two different, types of people. That's why it's like when I work with helicopter companies, like, oh, do you guys do photo flights or just tour flights? If you just do tours, then like you're not gonna, work the same way that we need to work for this one.
Yeah, I remember the guide who was my pilot. He had been a pilot in Vietnam, and he had flown missions rescuing people out of jungles. And I thought, yeah, that's the guy that I want flying me when we're dipping to get pictures
Hmm.
into volcanoes. It's like that would be like the least worrisome thing would be taking a couple photographers up compared to what his
Hmm.
life experience was. You mentioned something that I really connect with, and that is the idea of revisiting images over time. And when I've interviewed photographers, you have sort of one side of the spectrum where people say, I shoot it, I edit it, I move on. I don't look back. If people need to purchase or license images, everything is searchable, but their workflow is once they're done with it, they're done with it. And that's one legitimate way to look at it. You are revisiting things. And so my question is twofold. One is, as you mature, as we all do, and we get more experience, et cetera, um, what do you think you bring to revisiting those pictures that, with all these additional years of experience? And then the second piece of that is a very practical question is, how do you back up your pictures? How do you categorize them? How do you keyword them so you can do that look back as efficiently as possible?
So I think looking back at the work now, I've related to like you said, like we just, mature and we evolve. Our tastes change. What you were into in your 20s is probably far different than like what you're into now. It may not be the exact same thing. So like how you dress, music you listen to, whatever you're into, it just always evolves. So I think for photography, it's the same thing. And I thought it was a fascinating because one of my biggest inspirations in photography is Ralph Gibson. And he had done a great little TED talk, and he shared his like information that our eyes have the most nerve endings in all of our body, and he was saying that like when we make a photograph, like it's just so much being processed through these nerve endings through our eyes that our brain isn't fully understanding like everything that we're doing. So he shared when he revisited work, he started seeing like signatures of his like in early on before he recognized them. So that was very interesting because like I said, I'll make photos of this, like, oh, I don't know what it's for, but it's interesting to me. I'll make a picture of it. So when revisiting the work, it's twofold, right? So like you can go to a concert and you can shoot a set and you get your hero shot. Maybe it's the same thing in sports. Like you could shoot there's the game winning home run, there's the catch, there's that, right? But then there's always like things in between that you photograph that like they weren't hero shots per se at that time. So you're like, oh, that's all I need is just these here. I don't need to look at anything else. But so, for example, the reason why I'm revisiting the body of work is to hopefully put out a formal aerial photograph book of Los Angeles for 10 years. And so now all these little pieces that I'm looking back at, one, I'm recognizing, oh, that's a cool photograph. That's a strong photograph. But I'm also recognizing it's like puzzle pieces. So it's like, okay, like, yeah, here's my hero shot. But then, like, here's these other two or three shots that when you turn a page can sequence and work well and make this a bigger thing, which is important. So that's why I think you can shoot whatever you want. I think the idea of not revisiting it, months, years later, does yourself a disservice because you might rediscover like, oh my God, like I made this photograph then. It didn't trigger me then, but now it's triggering me now that this could work as a picture for something else. Um, so one, yeah, that's been super helpful. And again, it's just time and aging that allows us to see things differently. And as far as like organizing, it's a mixture of things. So if the digital work is just, backed up two or three times, I have a catalog of folders and cities. If it's portraits I made of people over the years, like they have their own folder. If it's cities that I've shot, like Los Angeles, it can be broken down into, Los Angeles in 23, and there's an aerial folder. Then there's folders of photos that I made in like Hollywood or LA, like downtown LA. So like areas are kind of like individualized within the folders.
Okay.
Um, so it's usually pretty easy too, Then I have like everything, the raw stuff just cataloged, month and year and date, import, which is really helpful. And then also I do make 11 by 14 prints of like key shots, and I have like little archival binders that like LA aerial stuff, this year, or, portraits of this person. So the physical backup is just as important because if anything did happen to the drives, at least want to have something of reference that like I could scan in again or do something with, to have. And then the negative side, film side, like that's like a whole other beast. So like I'm really really revisiting all of that stuff to figure out like what's a good storage and like workflow for me to organize and find stuff. So that's been the challenge for the past maybe 3 or 4 months for me, is like doing that. I've been working with the Icon Film Lab in LA. They've been helping me get, a lot of proof and contact sheets made and drum scans for like really long standing archival, process of the film frames. Yeah. But digital, I kind of got that down. Film, I'm still navigating.
With the work that you're doing, especially the aerial work, I think anyway, and you would be the better person to know the answer to this, but I think because of the nature of the subjects, they lend themselves to larger prints because there's just so much in an image.
Mhm.
So my question to you is, where do you see the collector market for photographs today. As I mentioned at the top, you and I met in Los Angeles at the Leica Gallery, and they had a wonderful exhibit going on there. And they're, one of, X number of galleries in Los Angeles and obviously all over the world. But what is your take on the collector market for your work and just photographs in general? And have you seen that change in the last several years in any particular way?
I think there's different stages to collectors. I think there's like diehard art collectors who want, very limited runs. They want, some of them want like dark room silver gelatin like prints. Like they want, they understand that. So like if you make a certain size print on silver gelatin, you could say, well, this is like $500 more than like, the pigment dye inkjet print.
Sure.
Some people might not fully grasp that, but I think those collectors, like, they know what they want. They're looking for that. Um, I think the photography market as a whole, it's photography photographs to me. Let me backtrack. Photographs to me are I really relate them to like an investment, like a stock. So if you make a photograph yesterday, it can be recognized as a cool or great photograph today, but the time will tell when it's 10 years, 20 years later, how strong it's holding up. And that really tests the merit of it. So some photographs really don't mature in value till later on,
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's part of the photographer market as well. Is like whether you want to call it nostalgia, whether it's just this is something else presents itself in the meaning of the photograph over time. Some of it could be branding. Some of it could be, oh, that's the hot photographer right now. Like I just want to get that photograph. Some of it is really just decorative. Like the way I look at photographs as prints and work, and not just myself, but like other people. I feel like we all can recognize for the most part our radio hits, our radio singles of our work. Like
Right.
these are photographs that we're proud of, but we also understand they're very easily digestible to most people, and it's a piece that can work as a print in the living room. It could work as a photograph in a book. Like it has a lot of things. And there's like our personal deep cuts where we make photographs that might have a different meaning to us on a deeper layer, and it kind of really requires someone with a certain eye or a certain thought process to like understand that picture. It may not be the biggest seller, but like emotionally, maybe it's stronger than other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that has helped me with my work is this understanding there's different facets of people who collect my work and who are into my work. Um, and I'm cool with that. And I also think too, it's just like it's a tough thing because we live in this like great technological age, like the idea of like, if you wanted to make an edition of 20 prints, like to do that in a dark room and to make each print the same, is a true labor of love, like to do that. And I respect the people who do that the most. The archival quality and the printing quality through pigment dye inkjets has gotten exceptionally well since I think they first came out. And it's also like, well, like why, I don't run prints all the time. I'll do limited editions. I guess when I'm okay, it's been a while. I'll do it, and I'll do the editions on different sizes and different papers to make them vary. But it's just I don't know. I think it's fun for us to get our art out there and share it with people. So I mean, I have collectors who are serious collectors, and I have like I offer work that's more reachable and affordable to a lot of people because I think that's kind of like not a classism within art, but it's also it just holds people back from having an opportunity to have something unique in their home or their living room. And that's I guess that's my take on it. I think photography it's just yeah, I think the art market's there for it. I think especially with the more emergence of more digital stuff, AI and like all these different things. I don't know. I'm hoping that just more simpler process analog photographs or digital stuff like retain more value as filters are easy to apply. You can change the sky, you can change this. It's like it's just so crazy. But I think the art market is there, but it just takes time to like really get the value out of your photographs.
It's amazing to me to think that during the I'll call it the heyday of people like Avedon and others, that their work, no matter how talented they clearly were, commercial work was not really considered artistic. Photographs were not really put in that same category as art, and
Mhm.
certainly not commercial photography. And it's really only been in more recent times when photographs have been given their just due. And when I go back and look at some of these pictures, not exclusively from the 50s and 60s, but when I do see those and I see the literally the artistry of,
Hmm.
I mean, it could even be something as basic as like Hollywood headshots from the 50s. And I mean, the look of it, incredible. Or, I was at Fahey Klein Gallery, and I saw these incredible New York City jazz musicians photographed in the 50s. And you've got,
Hmm.
cigarette smoke in the club. And obviously that doesn't happen anymore. And, just looking at some of these performers, and I mean, how is that not art? But there was a point in time when, that was certainly just not considered art. It wasn't considered on the same
Hmm.
footing as a painting. And then in more recent times, you have celebrities like Elton John, who are very well known as collectors of photography. So I think it's really evolved, and I'm super glad to see that. I know you mentioned Ralph Gibson, who, I'm just fascinated by how, I'll use the term he favors, if that's a fair term, but he favors a vertical composition versus a
Hmm.
horizontal composition. And I've always thought vertical, there's certain situations that are lend themselves more to vertical, some more to horizontal, but he's almost like all vertical all the time. And that's okay. And when you do things that way, I think it forces you to see a picture differently than what your initial thought would be. So, my question to you is, in addition to Ralph Gibson, who are a few of these photographers, whether it's, going back, years or present day, where you just look at their work and say, wow, what an eye, what an execution of a photograph, where you're just like, that's a gallery show I would get up and drive to go see. Who was that small group
Mm.
that consists of?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So Ralph, Andre Cortez, Moholy-Nagy, Bauhaus was really intriguing. Like seeing his photo work from his time. Another great I thought was Imogen Cunningham. She had a great eye and versatile in subject matter. Martine Frank, I love her work. She was Bresson's wife and also did photography. I love her stuff. Getting more modern, I'm just gonna glance at my bookshelf, like Ari Makopoulos.
Okay.
I love his work between subject matter, but also publishing. Like he self-publishes small zines, but then he'll do like formal larger books. So, I think he kind of like breaks down his barrier of like, oh, you have to like do the formal publishing route. He kind of does what he wants to do. I mean, I got Irving Penn on my bookshelf. Some Bruce Davison stuff. I think those ones are pretty heavy rotation. um just just I think what ties a lot of them together, I think, as far as like why they interest me, is they're versatile in subject matter. None of them were solely one type of thing that's all they photographed.
Mm-hmm.
And Andre Cortez is like, touted as like sharing, like, I make photos every day, new photos every day. Like, why can't I make a photograph of this object on my shelf as interesting as something else? So I think that practice of like just, and it's a fun workshop for ourselves and a practice just to be like, okay, well, like there's nothing grand or big going on in front of me. I want to make photographs. Like, can I make this look interesting? So I think that that's a fun exercise. And yeah, all of their work is just like they didn't they didn't let something like blockade them into I'm just doing this. And that's the thing too that I liked about like what really was eye opening with Ralph, what I loved was, just this idea of we could take a photo of architecture, like going back to what you said about human forms and shapes and all these things. You can photograph an architecture, you can photograph a human form and put them side by side, and they're relatable. And to the viewer, they make sense and they work. So I think that's a really great outlet to photography because, like, that is our signature style. Like, how you make a photograph with one subject matter shouldn't hold you back from making a photograph with another and presenting them.
Mm-hmm.
There's nuances that can connect, and I thought that was very intriguing.
I think it's certainly not coincidental that some of the photographers you mentioned and the reasons why you like them are that they are versatile, and that's sort of a hallmark of yourself, and that versatility. I get asked, and I'm sure you do as well, by whether they're chronologically young photographers or amateurs who are looking to evolve their photography. What can I do to get published? What can I do to be a working photographer? What can I do? And my context for that is very often I'm shooting a Major League Baseball game, and there will be young photographers. Maybe they've come to work for the team, maybe they graduated with a degree in
Hmm.
photography or related visual arts. And my advice has always been to figure out your vision, your style. A lot of people can make a properly exposed picture that's not blurry unless it's designed to be blurry for artistic reasons, but find your artistic way of looking at things. If it looks like everybody else's picture, then they could hire you or everybody else. So I guess two-parter here for you. One is, do you feel like you have a particular style? And then when people inevitably ask you that question, what is your advice to them?
Yeah, I mean, I have a relatable style. I try to find shapes and forms. I'm a big fan of the vertical framing as well. I think just when you're shooting with a 50 or higher, it just usually it isolates what you're trying to see better. It's more your perspective. So I agree with that. But yeah, like that's where it's just kind of like usually black and white is my choice. If I'm shooting film, I prefer that color. I'm still working on like fully understanding that. Yeah, but my style mostly I would say it's a vertical. It has an environmental touch to it, like the whole atmosphere of the setting, not just so narrow in on that. And just a relaxed form, trying to show people what I see. That those are the photos always intrigued me. Was like, wow, like that's so unique to see such a thing like that, like in such a way. So not to be too vague, but that's kind of what it is. Where it's like a mundane ball of light, a mundane setting, a mundane moment, but finding a way to make that picture, more interesting than it could be imagined. And then as far as the second part of the question was just how like younger people or newer photographers coming up, like what's the advice to them?
Mhm.
My take is, make photographs not of what you think other people want, but make photographs of what is exciting to you. Spend time looking at your work. I highly would recommend printing it and sitting with like a physical print of your favorite photographs and just looking at them undisturbed, seeing what resonates to you about them. If you can't do that, look at them on your screen. But more importantly, yeah, like just reviewing your work, right? Because we can make photographs so fast paced these days that you don't really sit with like, oh, it's a good picture, process done, posted to online somewhere, on to the next. You're not even like really looking at like what you just did. So I would say do that. And then I would just say, if there's no opportunities presented to you right now, make them as best you can. Like if you want to be a sports photographer, but you're not, you just don't have that access to the teams or to the field, like, but you go to these games anyway, bring whatever cameras that they'll let you in with and like make an editorial piece of the game or just document the games going on. And now you have a body of work. So it's like, I think that's the thing is like a lot of people wait for opportunities for them to like make photographs or make work, but you're kind of holding yourself back. It's like just do what you can with what's in front of you. And that's maybe it's a skateboarder do it yourself kind of thing, but it's like until someone presents you that opportunity, show them why they should give you that opportunity. Like
Yeah,
so if you're shooting ball games and you're making prints or you're making little editorial stories or you're showing like just cataloging one team's games, home games, like you're showing someone like, wow, this person's got an eye. They're not just shooting the game, they're finding these atmospheric themes that are really important at a baseball game or something. Yeah. So I would just say like just if the opportunities aren't there, make them for yourself as much as you can.
yeah, I think sometimes people place roadblocks in front of them that maybe don't even really exist. And I'll hear from people, oh, if I had a press pass, I could get this picture and this and that. And to which I say, isn't there a high school with a baseball team a mile from your house?
Hmm.
You can go shoot that. You can make
Hmm.
pictures. And yeah, it's exactly what you said. And even what we said earlier, which is number one, you have to recognize where opportunities are. You have to look for them, you have to recognize them, and then you have to move forward with them, because you're really not held back by a press
Mhm.
pass or field access or those kind of things. One thing that has become really apparent to me in the past few years, hosting this podcast, is that about 7 years ago, I moved from using another brand for a lot of my street photography, portraiture, really everything other than sports and wildlife. I moved from another brand to Leica. And I mention that because there's so many good camera companies out there in terms of making credible, functional cameras that are infinitely better than they were 5 years ago. That said, I have never, in the brands that I've worked with, I've never found a true sense of community like I feel there is with people who, whether they're professionals or amateurs, who use Leica. It's almost like in any given city where there's a Leica store, it's almost like a clubhouse in a sense, where if you walk in, whether you own a Leica or you don't, it's like a house of photography. And it's like that saying, all are welcome. And I know when I was at the Leica 100th anniversary event in New York City this past year, there were thousands of people there, most of which did not own a Leica. All were certainly welcome. All were engaged. What do you think it is about a brand that is, sort of creates that culture? I can't put my finger on it. And you are certainly much more involved in it, regularly than I am, but I am enough to recognize it. So I'm sure that you have at least some perspective on it.
I think for Leica, what separates them from some of the other companies, it's one, I would just say it's like just their history, being such, like you said, 100 years, so being such a older camera company. You see the iconic work made with their cameras over the years. So I think even just owning one of their cameras kind of makes you feel a part of that. Like, okay, I got a camera, like, like I could maybe make photos like that. Um, there's that aspect. And then I think there's also the aspect of the quality and design, like not to get into the materialistic part of it, but I mean, you hold, an M camera or a lens, like you feel a difference between that and, something else. And then I also would say, it's just part of it's not a club, but it's just like you're just part of this thing of photography, and they are such a component of photography that it it's just very welcoming. And I think the people who work with Leica understand that. And they're all about elevating the whole concept of photography, not just.
So, as far as Leica and its sort of unique nature creating a sense of community, what have you seen in your time working with them that makes them so unique in that regard?
I think what makes them unique is, so one, I think they understand the foundation of building community. That's why they got stores, all over the place. Like you mentioned, you walk into one, it's kind of, to expect in the other ones, not just in the US, but globally. I think for me as a photographer, I started out, using Canon. I tried Fuji, when I was able to, afford a Leica. I was like, you hear about it, you're kind of intrigued by it, right? So it's like, oh, well, let me just, get this and see what it is. So I bought a used M6 and with a 35 from Sammy's, and was kind of into it. Compact form, size, all that great design stuff. Um, but like, I think it's the lineage, like 100-year camera company who invented 35 millimeter photography, decades and decades of iconic photographs, whether, political moments, street photographs, portraiture, all these different things, like made with these cameras. So it's inspiring. I think the phrase I recently heard was, it makes photographers aspire to be a part of that. So even just getting the camera and owning it gives you this sense of motivation and inspiration. That, like, oh, like I can go out there with this tool, this camera, and make photographs, that hopefully one day are as strong and like long living as some of this stuff. And I just found it intriguing that, oh, okay, like they got stores, like, some of the other companies like don't have any stores anywhere. They do build community, but in a different way. Um, the people that I've met through like over the years, I think at this point I've had over a 10-year working relationship with them in some form. And, they're fans of photography, they're fans of the arts, they understand it. And I think it's just this nature thing of like, oh, like you see the camera's not about like, oh, you have enough money to get one too, like you're part of it. I think when we see that and we recognize that, it's not like, oh, like the price tag around your neck. It's more like, oh, you probably share a similar understanding that I do of photography, of this company's lineage and history and what they contributed to photography. I feel like that's a bit of the connection, for a lot of us. And then coming from skateboarding, what you said was like the similar thing. Like, once you understand skate shop culture and you go into a skate shop, like you can go to anywhere in the country, in the world, and if you're a skateboarder and you walk in, it's almost like open arms because we're all in this together. And that's the thing that I found fascinating between, Leica's community building photography and whole relative to skateboarding was, you know, when you play, when you're young and you're playing traditional sport leagues, that can be costly to a lot of families where it's like you got to get a uniform, you got to be sure no one's working to take you to the game, to the
Mhm.
field that day. It's a lot that can kind of go into it. But versus skateboarding, as long as you had a skateboard, you're in the game. And I grew up skateboarding with kids of different ethnicities, backgrounds, economic stats, like all these things. It was like all that dissolved because like, oh, like you skate, I skate, like let's go have fun and do this. Photography and the Leica community, I felt, has been pretty relative in that where like we're meeting people of, women, men, cultural backgrounds, everything. And we're just like, I mean, it's a rare moment when like through photography and the connection of photography that like you could be, just a working photographer, but also have a great conversation with someone who owns like a whiskey company or something that you both might not connect in a room any other way other than photography and Leica. So I think that's what makes them pretty special is that they recognize that and they embrace that and they do their best to uplift and build a community.
Yeah, it's a great icebreaker. It's commonality, and it
Yeah.
makes the conversation, very very easy. Well, I know, Stefan, that people are going to want to not only follow your work, but also look at the prints that you're doing and the workshops you're running. What are the best places for people to stay up on everything that you have going on, whether it's a website or social media? What's the best place to follow you?
Website is great. It's just my name, stefanvanasco.com. There's a newsletter that you can subscribe to that I do emails about updating workshops, projects going on, self-publishing zines that are coming out. Aside from that, the website will have links to my socials, but the socials are just the same. My name, Stefan Vanasco, Instagram threads, Facebook. Don't really use X that much these days, but I mean that's kind of like the bottleneck of like social media outlets, I think, for a lot of us. But yeah, and that's pretty much it to keep up. I pretty active on Threads and Instagram as far as like promoting and sharing workshops and upcoming projects.
That's great. That's great. And I want to say how much I greatly appreciate you making the time to do this, having met recently, and here we are doing this. And I just really want to say thank you. I appreciate your generosity of time and just kind of
Yeah.
sharing everything you have.
Hold on, I got a photo of you right now in the moment while I can. 1 second. There we go. All right. See if I
This is my
can get
first online
myself in
portrait
there.
session.
There we go, man. One, two. Thank you, man. Cool.
No hair and makeup, no nothing. Well, I also want to thank Moab again for their support on this episode. As you know, created in Moab and inspired by Utah's iconic red rock landscapes, Moab's archival fine art inkjet papers bring natural beauty to digital photography and art, and we certainly appreciate their support. You can check out, I have a bunch of stuff that's coming up on Instagram, so feel free to take a look at Mitch Stringer Images. You can also check out mitchstringerimages.com. And until next episode, I wish you great light. I wish you great shooting. We'll talk again soon.